I'm Ivy, 26 years old, and at 18, my parents kicked me out of our home without a second thought. While my perfect sister Sophia could do no wrong, I was always the problem child, the disappointment, the one who never measured up. When they chose the golden child over me, I never imagined that karma would come full circle years later. Standing on my own, I built a life they never thought possible for the daughter they discarded. Before I share my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If you've ever been unfairly labeled as the problem child in your family, hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, this journey has a satisfying ending you won't want to miss. I grew up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood in Chicago, the kind with perfectly manicured lawns, neighborhood barbecues, and a constant undercurrent of keeping up with the Joneses. Our two-story colonial house looked picture-perfect from the outside, but inside was a different story. My father, Michael, worked as an accountant at a prestigious firm downtown. He was stern, methodical, and emotionally distant. Numbers made sense to him, feelings did not. My mother, Diana, was a former beauty queen who had given up her career aspirations to become a housewife. She was obsessed with appearances and social status. How things looked mattered far more than how they actually were. Then there was my sister Sophia, 3 years younger than me. From the moment she was born, it seemed like she had a golden aura about her. She was naturally gifted at anything she tried, whether it was academic, sports, or charming the adults around her. She had our father's analytical mind and our mother's beauty and social grace, the perfect combination. I, on the other hand, was more like my grandmother. Creative, outspoken, and not particularly interested in fitting into the perfect little boxes my parents had constructed for us. I wasn't a bad student or a troublemaker, but I wasn't exceptional in the ways they valued. And in our house, being merely good was never enough. The double standard between Sophia and me became apparent early on. When Sophia brought home a B on a test, it was celebrated as a great achievement. When I brought home an A minus, I was questioned about why it wasn't an A plus. When Sophia forgot to do her chores, it was brushed off as an innocent mistake. When I forgot mine, I was grounded for being irresponsible. One particular memory stands out. I was 12, and I had worked for weeks on a science project about renewable energy. I'd built a working model of a wind turbine that could power a small light bulb. I was proud of it, especially since I'd done everything myself from the research to the construction. When I showed it to my parents, my father merely nodded and said, "That's nice, Ivy." A few months later, Sophia presented a baking soda volcano that my mother had clearly helped her make. My parents praised her for days, even calling grandparents and neighbors to come see what Sophia had accomplished. Despite the obvious favoritism, I kept trying to earn their approval. I joined the debate team, the student council, and the school newspaper. I maintained a 3.8 GPA. I volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends. But no matter what I did, it was never enough to shine as brightly as Sophia in their eyes. The one person who saw me, truly saw me, was my grandmother, my mother's mother. Grandma Rose was different from the rest of the family. She had been a librarian and had a house full of books and art. When I visited her, she would ask about my ideas, not just my grades. She encouraged my creativity and critical thinking. "You have a beautiful mind, Ivy," she would tell me. "Don't let anyone dim your light." Grandma Rose's house became my sanctuary. Whenever things got too tense at home, I would ride my bike to her place, just a few neighborhoods away. She would make me tea in her mismatched china cups and listen as I poured out my frustrations. She never spoke badly about my parents, but she did say once, "Some people don't know how to appreciate the gifts they've been given. That's their loss, not yours." When I was 14, Grandma Rose passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. I was devastated. Not only had I lost the one adult who unconditionally loved me, but I'd also lost my safe haven. After the funeral, I overheard my mother telling a relative, "At least she got to see Sophia win the regional spelling bee last month. That brought her so much joy." She didn't mention that Grandma Rose had attended my poetry reading just the week before she died, or how proud she had been when one of my pieces was selected for publication in a youth literary journal. After my grandmother's death, things at home deteriorated further. Without her buffer, the favoritism became even more pronounced. As I entered my teenage years, I started to speak up for myself more. not in a disrespectful way, but simply standing my ground. If my parents accused me of something Sophia had actually done, I would calmly present the evidence. If they dismissed my achievements while praising Sophia's lesser ones, I would point out the disparity. This newfound voice of mine was not well received. My father called it attitude, and my mother labeled it defiance. Meanwhile, Sophia learned to use the situation to her advantage. She was sweet as sugar in front of our parents, but a completely different person when they weren't looking. She would borrow my things without asking and return them damaged if at all. She would read my diary and threaten to tell our parents about my private thoughts if I didn't do what she wanted. Once she deliberately spilled soda on a painting I had spent weeks creating for a school art competition. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "Oops, but who would believe it was anything but an accident? We both know who the troublemaker is in this family." As Sophia entered her teenage years, she became even more calculating. She knew exactly how to twist situations to make herself look good and me look bad, and our parents primed to see her as the perfect child, and me as the problem fell for it every time. High school brought new challenges and intensified the friction at home. While I tried to keep my head down and focus on my studies, Sophia seemed determined to make my life difficult at every turn. There was the time she borrowed my history project the night before it was due. I had spent weeks researching the women's suffrage movement, creating a detailed timeline and accompanying essay. When I confronted her the next morning, she claimed she had just wanted to look at it for inspiration. By the time she returned it, it was too late for me to get to school early and print another copy. I received a 0 for late submission, despite explaining the situation to my teacher. Or the time she started a rumor at school that I had cheated on a test, when in reality I had received the highest grade because I had studied all weekend while she was at a party. Several classmates gave me the cold shoulder for weeks afterward, and even though the rumor was eventually disproven, the damage to my reputation had been done. Each time I tried to explain these situations to my parents, they would side with Sophia without even hearing me out completely. "Why would your sister do something like that?" my mother would ask incredulously. "You're just looking for someone to blame for your own mistakes," my father would add. Their unwavering belief in Sophia's innocence and my guilt was a constant source of pain. Perhaps the most hurtful incident came during my junior year. I had entered the state science competition with a project on water purification methods using locally available materials. After months of research and experimentation, I made it to the finals and won second place overall. It was the highest achievement of my academic career so far, and I was ecstatic. The same weekend, Sophia had participated in a local piano recital. She had played adequately, not winning any recognition, but not embarrassing herself either. When we both returned home on Sunday evening, our living room had been decorated with a banner reading, "Congratulations, Sophia." My mother had baked a cake, and there were flowers on the dining table. My father announced that we would be going out to Sophia's favorite restaurant to celebrate her performance. My science competition achievement was acknowledged with a brief, "Good job, Ivy," from my father, and nothing more. When I pointed out the disparity in their reactions, my mother accused me of being jealous and trying to steal Sophia's moment. "Why can't you just be happy for your sister for once?" she asked, as if I was the one who had been consistently undermining and overshadowing Sophia rather than the other way around. Throughout these difficult years, my friendship with Zoe was my lifeline. We had been friends since elementary school, and she had witnessed the dynamic in my family firsthand. Her house became my refuge after Grandma Rose passed away. Her parents, both professors at the local university, were warm, engaging people who actually seemed interested in what I had to say. They asked about my projects, remembered details from previous conversations, and created space for me to exist without constant comparison to someone else. During my senior year, I started dating Jake, who I met in AP Physics. Jake came from a large, boisterous family with 4 siblings who teased each other mercilessly, but clearly adored one another. The first time I had dinner with them, I was shocked at how his parents engaged equally with each child, asking specific questions about their interests and activities. They celebrated achievements big and small with the same enthusiasm. It was a revelation to see what healthy family dynamics could look like. As graduation approached, I focused intensely on my college applications and scholarship essays. I knew that higher education would be my ticket to independence. I applied to several schools, including some prestigious ones that offered robust financial aid packages. I wasn't naive enough to expect my parents to contribute significantly to my education. Not when Sophia's dance lessons, private tutoring, and designer wardrobe consumed so much of their disposable income. Sophia, now a high school freshman, seemed to resent the attention I was receiving from teachers and guidance counselors as I prepared for college. She had always been the star, the one everyone doted on. Now, as I started to build my own network of support and plan for a future away from home, her sabotage efforts intensified. She began telling our parents that I was sneaking out at night when in fact I was in my room studying. She claimed I was being disrespectful to them behind their backs, repeating out-of-context statements or outright fabrications. She even hinted that Jake was a bad influence, suggesting we were doing things we shouldn't be. My parents predictably believed her without question. They implemented new stricter rules specifically for me. My curfew was moved earlier, even on weekends. I had to check in hourly if I went out. My phone and computer were subject to random searches. My bedroom door had to remain open at all times when I was home. It was like living in a prison while Sophia waltzed around with complete freedom. The more restrictions they placed on me, the more I realized I would never be treated fairly in this household. No amount of evidence, good behavior, or achievement would ever be enough to overcome their perception of me as the problem, and Sophia as the perfect child. All I could do was count down the days until graduation and focus on my escape plan. The letter from Northwestern University arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I had been accepted with a partial scholarship that would cover about half of my tuition. It was one of the top schools on my list with an excellent program in my intended major. I was thrilled but also anxious about how to cover the remaining costs. When I shared the news with my parents over dinner, their reaction was lukewarm at best. "Northwestern is expensive," my father said, frowning at the financial aid information. "We haven't budgeted for this." "But you're planning to help Sophia attend dance camp in New York this summer," I pointed out. "That costs almost as much as a semester's tuition." "That's different," my mother interjected. "Sophia has exceptional talent. That camp could lead to incredible opportunities for her." The message was clear. Investing in Sophia's future was a priority. Investing in mine was an inconvenience. I swallowed my hurt and simply nodded. "I understand. I'll figure it out." And I did. I picked up extra shifts at the bookstore where I worked part-time. I applied for every small scholarship I could find. I researched student loans and work-study programs. I was determined to make this happen with or without their support. As my high school graduation approached, there was a family gathering to celebrate. Aunts, uncles, and cousins came from various parts of the country. During the party, my mother's sister, Aunt Kathy, pulled me aside. "I noticed something strange, Ivy," she said quietly. "Your parents seem to talk about Sophia's accomplishments nonstop, but they barely mention yours. And I know you're the one graduating with honors and heading to Northwestern." It was validating to have someone else notice the disparity. "It's always been that way," I admitted. Aunt Kathy frowned. "That's not right, honey. I hope you know how impressive you are regardless of what they say or don't say." Her acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that from an adult in my family. Meanwhile, Sophia was seething. She had always been the center of attention at family gatherings. But now relatives were asking me about my college plans, congratulating me on my scholarships and giving me graduation gifts. It was more positive attention than I had received in years, and Sophia couldn't stand it. The day after the family gathering, I came home from work to find my mother in tears and my father pacing the living room, his face flushed with anger. Sophia sat on the couch, a picture of distress, though I caught a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes when she saw my confusion. "Where is it?" my father demanded without preamble. "Where is what?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "Your mother's diamond bracelet, the one that belonged to her grandmother." I shook my head, still not understanding. "I don't know what you're talking about." My mother sobbed harder. "How could you, Ivy? That bracelet was a family heirloom." I was saving it to give to Sophia on her 18th birthday. The pieces started to fall into place. I didn't take anything, I said firmly. I've been at work since this morning. Sophia saw you going through Mom's jewelry box yesterday. My father said, his tone making it clear he believed this without question. I turned to Sophia, who was dabbing at non-existent tears with a tissue. That's a lie, I said. I wasn't even home yesterday afternoon. I was studying at the library with Jake and Zoe. You can call them and verify. Why would Sophia lie about something like this? My mother asked, as if the very suggestion was absurd. Because she's been lying about me for years, I replied, my patience finally wearing thin. And you've never once questioned it. My father's face darkened. This is serious, Ivy. That bracelet is worth thousands of dollars. If you don't return it immediately, we'll have no choice but to involve the police. Go ahead, I said, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Call them, I have nothing to hide. To my shock, my father pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As we waited for the police to arrive, the tension in the house was unbearable. My mother continued to cry. My father stood with his arms crossed, glaring at me. Sophia maintained her facade of distress, but there was something else in her expression too. A hint of panic that hadn't been there before. Maybe she hadn't expected them to actually call the police. When 2 officers arrived, my father explained the situation, painting me as a problem child who had finally crossed the line into criminal behavior. The officers asked to search my room, and I agreed immediately. I had nothing to hide. As one officer went upstairs with my father, the other stayed in the living room asking questions about when the bracelet was last seen and who had access to it. In the middle of this conversation, there was a shout from upstairs. Found it! We all rushed upstairs to find my father standing in the doorway of Sophia's room, not mine. The officer had opened her jewelry box, and there, nestled among her own trinkets, was my mother's diamond bracelet. The look of shock on my parents' faces might have been satisfying if I wasn't so hurt and angry. Sophia immediately launched into her defense. Ivy must have planted it there, she cried. She's always been jealous of me. She's trying to frame me. The officer looked skeptical. In the few minutes since we arrived, when you've all been in the living room together. My father, unwilling to accept the obvious conclusion, jumped to Sophia's defense. She must have hidden it there earlier, knowing we'd search her room first. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even with the evidence right in front of them, they were still twisting the narrative to make me the villain. Actually, the officer said, we searched her room first and found nothing. I decided to check other rooms as a standard procedure. A tense silence fell over the room. The officers exchanged a look that clearly said they'd seen family dynamics like this before. After taking statements and confirming that the bracelet had been found, they left, but not before one of them gave me a sympathetic glance. Once they were gone, I expected an apology, an acknowledgement that they had jumped to conclusions, some recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, their golden child wasn't as perfect as they believed. Instead, my father turned to me, his expression cold. I don't know how you pulled this off, Ivy, but this is the last straw. What? I stared at him in disbelief. The bracelet was found in Sophia's room. How can you still blame me? Because I know my daughters, he said. Sophia would never steal. You, on the other hand, have always been difficult, always causing problems. My mother nodded in agreement, putting her arm around Sophia, who was still sniffling dramatically. I think it's time we addressed your behavior once and for all, she said. You have 2 options, my father continued. Either you admit what you did and agree to see a therapist about your issues, or you can leave this house. You're 18 now. We're not legally obligated to support you anymore. I looked from my father to my mother, searching for any sign of the parents who had once held me as a baby, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had bandaged my scraped knees. I found nothing but cold resolve and blind devotion to the narrative they had created, where Sophia could do no wrong and I could do no right. I didn't take the bracelet, I said quietly. I didn't plant it in Sophia's room, but you're right about one thing. I am 18, and I don't need to stay where I'm not wanted or believed. I turned and walked to my room, pulled out the suitcase I had already packed for college, and began adding the rest of my essential belongings. As I packed, tears streamed down my face, but I didn't let them see me cry. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Within an hour, I had packed everything I could fit into a suitcase and a backpack. my books, my clothes, my few precious mementos. As I walked down the stairs for the last time, my parents stood in the living room watching coldly. Sophia hovered behind them, a mixture of triumph and uncertainty in her eyes. Perhaps she hadn't expected her lie to result in this extreme outcome. "Where will you go?" my mother asked, a flicker of concern finally crossing her face. "Does it matter to you?" I replied. She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I walked out the door of my childhood home with no clear plan and a heart full of pain. I was 18 years old, had less than $2,000 to my name, and was about to start college in a few months. But in that moment, as I walked away from the house where I had never truly been valued, I felt a strange mixture of terror and freedom. At least now the situation was honest. They had chosen Sophia explicitly and irrevocably, and I had chosen myself. The first night after being kicked out, I stayed with Zoe. I called her from the corner of our street, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. Without hesitation, she said, "Come over, now." Zoe's parents, Dr. and Dr. Walker, both professors with PhDs, were equally immediate in their support. "Of course you'll stay with us," Zoe's mother said when I arrived at their doorstep with my suitcase, "for as long as you need." That night, lying on the pull-out couch in their den, I cried until I had no tears left. It wasn't just about being kicked out. It was the culmination of years of rejection, of never being good enough, of trying so hard only to be dismissed. The Walkers had shown me more care and concern in one evening than my parents had in years. Despite their generosity, I knew I couldn't stay with the Walkers indefinitely. They had already done so much for me, and I didn't want to be a burden. So I set about making a plan. The first step was dealing with my college situation. I made an appointment with the financial aid office at Northwestern to explain my changed circumstances. The counselor I met with, Ms. Rodriguez, listened to my story with compassion and professionalism. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you might think," she said. "The good news is that as an independent student, you'll qualify for additional aid." She helped me update my FAFSA to reflect my status as effectively homeless and guided me through applications for emergency grants and increased work-study opportunities. By the end of our meeting, my financial situation for college looked more manageable, though I would still need to work throughout my studies. Next, I needed to find a more permanent living situation. Ms. Rodriguez connected me with the university's housing department, which sometimes had early move-in options for students with extenuating circumstances. After several emails and phone calls, I secured a spot in a summer dormitory, usually reserved for international students, at a reduced rate that I could afford with my savings and bookstore job. The month between my high school graduation and moving into the dorm was a blur of working double shifts, sleeping on the Walker's pull-out couch, and battling waves of depression and self-doubt. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, when the weight of my parents' rejection felt like a physical presence crushing my chest. On those days, Zoe would sit with me sometimes in silence, sometimes reminiscing about our happier memories, sometimes just making me laugh with her terrible impressions of our high school teachers. Jake was another pillar of support during this time. He would pick me up after my shifts at the bookstore, and we would drive to the lake and talk for hours. His family also offered me a place to stay, but I didn't want to put that pressure on our relatively new relationship. Still, the knowledge that there were people who cared about me, who saw value in me when my own family didn't, was what kept me going on the darkest days. Finally, in late June, I moved into my summer dorm at Northwestern. The room was small and basic, with a narrow bed, a desk, and a dresser, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space where no one was comparing me to anyone else, where I could exist without constantly trying to prove my worth. I found a job at the campus bookstore and another at a coffee shop nearby. Between the two, I could cover my living expenses and save a little for the upcoming school year. It was exhausting working two jobs while preparing for college, but there was also something empowering about supporting myself. When fall arrived and the regular school year began, I threw myself into my studies. I had declared a major in business with a focus on technology, a field that combined my analytical skills with my interest in innovation. My classes were challenging but engaging, and for once my hard work was recognized and rewarded on its own merits. I made new friends who knew nothing about my family drama, who liked me for who I was rather than comparing me to a golden child sister. My roommate Talia was a music major from California, with a contagious laugh and an uncanny ability to know when I needed company and when I needed space. We would stay up late talking about everything from classical composers to cryptocurrency, our conversations flowing easily in a way they never had at home. Occasionally, I would run into relatives or family friends who had heard Sophia's version of events. According to the story that had made its way through the family grapevine, I had stolen jewelry, lied about it, and run away rather than face the consequences. These encounters were painful reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal, but each time I would simply state the truth calmly and change the subject. I had learned that those who were determined to believe the worst of me would do so regardless of the evidence. I limited my contact with my parents to brief cordial interactions on major holidays, a text message on Thanksgiving, a generic Christmas card, a short phone call on my mother's birthday. They never asked how I was managing financially or academically. They never expressed remorse for their actions or doubt about their assumptions. And Sophia, whenever I did see her at family gatherings, maintained an air of triumphant superiority, secure in her position as the favored child. The emotional toll of their rejection was significant. There were nights when I would lie awake wondering what was wrong with me. What fundamental flaw had made my own parents unable to love me as they loved Sophia? There were days when a simple trigger, a mother and daughter laughing together in a cafe, a family walking arm in arm on campus, would send me into a spiral of grief for the relationship I had never had, and now never would. But there was also a freedom in no longer trying to earn their approval. I could pursue my own interests, develop my own opinions, make my own mistakes, without the constant fear of disappointing them. I could be authentically myself, not the version of me they had always wanted me to be. In my sophomore year, I took a class on entrepreneurship that changed the trajectory of my life. The professor, Dr. Harrison, was a former tech executive who had started several successful companies before turning to academia. He challenged us to identify problems we were passionate about solving and develop business concepts around them. Drawing on my own experiences with isolation and emotional distress, I proposed an app that would connect people with affordable mental health resources, particularly focused on young adults who had experienced family rejection or trauma. Dr. Harrison saw potential in the idea and encouraged me to develop it further, even outside of class. "You have something most entrepreneurs don't, Ivy," he told me after I presented my concept. "You have personal experience with the problem you're trying to solve. That gives you insights others might miss." For the first time, I began to see how my painful past might become the foundation for something meaningful, how my struggles might enable me to help others facing similar situations. It was a turning point in how I viewed my story, not just as a tale of rejection, but as the beginning of something new and important. By the time I graduated from Northwestern at 22, I had more than just a diploma to show for my 4 years of hard work. I had a solid business plan for my mental health app, a small but growing network of contacts in the tech industry, and a newfound confidence in my abilities. The app I had developed, which I named Refuge, was designed to help users find mental health resources based on their specific needs, location, and financial situation. It included a directory of affordable therapists, support groups, and crisis services, as well as a community forum where users could share experiences and advice. The feature I was most proud of was the sliding scale function, which helped users find providers who adjusted their fees based on income, something I had struggled to navigate during my own search for therapy. After graduation, I continued working at the coffee shop while developing Refuge in every spare moment. Professor Harrison, who had become a mentor to me, introduced me to several potential investors who were interested in socially conscious startups. After numerous pitches and rejections, I finally secured seed funding from a venture capital firm that specialized in health technology. The initial investment wasn't huge, just enough to allow me to work on Refuge full-time and hire a part-time developer to help with the technical aspects I couldn't handle alone. We worked out of a tiny office that was really just a converted storage space above a local bookstore. But it was a start. The first year was brutal. Long hours, constant technical challenges. the perpetual stress of making payroll and meeting investor expectations. There were nights when I slept on a futon in the office because I was too exhausted to make the trip back to my small apartment. There were moments when I questioned whether I had taken on too much, whether I should have opted for the security of a corporate job instead of the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. But gradually, things began to improve. Refuge gained users slowly at first, then more rapidly, as word spread through social media and mental health advocacy networks. We secured a partnership with a national counseling association, which significantly expanded our database of providers. A tech blog featured us in an article about apps making a social impact, bringing a wave of new users and attention. With this growth came the need for more help. I hired a full-time developer and a marketing coordinator. We moved to a real office, small but legitimate, with actual desks and a conference room. I was able to pay myself a modest but stable salary enough to move to a slightly larger apartment with a separate bedroom instead of a studio. Throughout this period of professional growth, I was also working on my personal development. The therapy I had started during college had helped me process much of the trauma from my childhood and the pain of my family's rejection. I was learning to trust people again, to believe that not everyone would eventually compare me to someone else and find me wanting. This healing process allowed me to open myself up to new relationships. I made genuine friendships with my employees and fellow entrepreneurs. I maintained my connections with Zoe and Jake, who had both stayed in Chicago after college, and I met David, a software engineer, who had recently moved to the city from Seattle. David and I connected at a tech meetup where I was presenting Refuge to the local developer community. He asked insightful questions about our backend infrastructure and offered some suggestions for improving our search algorithm. We exchanged contact information ostensibly for professional reasons, but soon found ourselves texting about everything from obscure sci-fi novels to the best pizza places in Chicago. Our first date was at a tiny Ethiopian restaurant where we ended up staying until closing time, deep in conversation about our backgrounds, our goals, our views on everything from politics to parenthood. Unlike previous relationships where I had carefully curated what I shared about my family situation with David, I found myself being completely honest from the beginning. My parents chose my sister over me, I told him. They kicked me out when I was 18 because they believed her lies over the truth, even when the evidence was right in front of them. Instead of the pity or discomfort I had come to expect when sharing this story, David simply nodded and said, "That says everything about them and nothing about you." His matter-of-fact acceptance was refreshing. He didn't try to suggest that there must be two sides to the story, or that perhaps my parents had meant well. He just acknowledged the reality of what had happened and the impact it had had on me. As our relationship progressed, David became not just my boyfriend, but also a valuable advisor for Refuge. His technical expertise complemented my business focus, and soon he was spending most of his free time helping me improve the app. After a year of this informal arrangement, I officially brought him on as a partner in the company. Working and living together could have been a strain on our relationship, but instead, it strengthened our bond. We balanced each other well with his pragmatic approach, tempering my occasional tendency toward perfectionism, and my vision giving direction to his technical skills. Together, we navigated the challenges of growing a startup while building a life together. During this time, my contact with my family remained minimal. I would occasionally hear updates through extended family members. Sophia had graduated college and immediately landed a high-paying job at a prestigious marketing firm, thanks to connections my father had made through his accounting practice. My parents had bought her a house as a graduation gift, a 3-bedroom condo in one of Chicago's most desirable neighborhoods. It was exactly the kind of generous support they had never offered me. These updates used to sting badly, but as I built my own success, the pain began to dull. I was creating something meaningful on my own terms. I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. And while a part of me would always mourn the loving family I never had, I was learning to find fulfillment in the family I was creating for myself. The real turning point for Refuge came when we were featured in a major tech publication's annual Apps That Make a Difference list. The exposure brought a flood of new users and attracted the attention of larger investors. Within months, we had secured a significant round of funding that allowed us to expand our team, enhance our features, and begin marketing nationally. We moved to a proper office in downtown Chicago, hired a team of developers and content specialists, and launched a completely redesigned version of the app with additional features suggested by our user community. I was no longer just Ivy the founder. I was Ivy the CEO of a growing company, with employees who depended on me and users who benefited from our service. As the company grew, I made it a priority to create a culture that valued every employee equally. There were no golden children at Refuge. Ideas were evaluated on their merits, not on who proposed them. Achievements were celebrated regardless of whether they came from the newest intern or the most senior developer. I was determined to build a workplace that was the opposite of the home I had grown up in. At 26, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined when I walked out of my parents' house 8 years earlier. Refuge had grown into a successful company, valued at several $1 million, with over 50 employees and hundreds of thousands of users across the country. We had expanded beyond the app to include a scholarship program for students who had experienced family rejection, and we were in talks with several universities about integrating our resources into their student wellness programs. The professional recognition was gratifying, but what meant the most to me was the messages we received from users who had found hope and healing through our platform. People who, like me, had been cast aside by those who should have loved them most, but who had found the support they needed to rebuild their lives. Each success story felt like a validation of my own journey, a confirmation that pain could indeed be transformed into purpose. Then came the call that changed everything again. I was working late one evening reviewing our quarterly financial reports when my cell phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Thinking it might be a potential business contact, I answered. Ivy. The voice was immediately recognizable, though I hadn't heard it in years except for brief holiday exchanges. My mother. Yes, I replied, my guard immediately rising. Is everything okay? I, we, your father and I were wondering if we could meet with you, to talk. I was stunned into momentary silence. In 8 years, my parents had never once reached out to suggest a meeting or a conversation about what had happened. Our interactions had been limited to the most superficial exchanges. Why now? I asked finally. There was a pause on the other end of the line. We saw the article about you in Business Weekly, the 30 under 30 feature. We'd like to reconnect. Of course. It wasn't about remorse or a desire to make amends. It was about the public recognition I had received, the success that had made me someone worth acknowledging again. Part of me wanted to refuse to tell them they had lost the right to be part of my life when they had chosen to believe the worst of me without evidence. But curiosity won out. Fine, I said. Coffee next Saturday, the cafe on Michigan Avenue near the Art Institute. I chose a public place deliberately somewhere neutral, where the conversation would naturally be limited to an hour or so. Somewhere I could leave easily if things went badly. When Saturday came, I arrived early, selecting a table near the door. I had dressed carefully, professional but not flashy, successful but not trying too hard. I wanted to project confidence, to show them I had thrived despite their abandonment, not because I needed their approval, but because I wanted them to see what they had thrown away. They arrived together looking older than I remembered. My father's hair had gone completely gray, and my mother's face showed lines that hadn't been there 8 years ago. They spotted me and approached tentatively as if unsure of their welcome, which of course they were. Ivy, my mother said, leaning in for a hug that I didn't reciprocate. I offered a handshake instead, which she accepted with a flicker of hurt in her eyes. Thank you for meeting us, my father said as they sat down across from me. The conversation that followed was as awkward as I had expected. They asked surface-level questions about my life, where I lived, how I had come up with the idea for Refuge, whether I enjoyed running a company. I answered truthfully but without elaboration. I didn't mention David or my friends or any of the personal growth I had experienced. Those parts of my life were precious to me, and I wasn't ready to share them. As the minutes ticked by, it became increasingly clear that they had no intention of addressing the elephant in the room. There was no acknowledgement of how they had treated me, No apology for believing Sophia's lies. No recognition of the pain they had caused. Instead, they spoke as if we had simply drifted apart due to circumstances beyond anyone's control, as if there had been no dramatic expulsion, no years of silence. Then my father cleared his throat and leaned forward slightly. Your company, Refuge, it seems to be doing very well. I nodded, waiting. We've always known you had potential, Ivy, my mother added quickly. We're not surprised at your success. I had to suppress a bitter laugh. They had never indicated any belief in my potential. Quite the opposite. We were thinking, my father continued, that perhaps we could have dinner sometime. As a family. You, us, and Sophia, of course. It's been too long since we've all been together. And there it was. The real reason for this sudden interest in reconnecting. Not because they had realized their mistake or wanted to make amends, but because they saw my success and wanted to claim it as part of the family narrative. They wanted access to the daughter who was now successful enough to be worth acknowledging. How is Sophia? I asked, deflecting the invitation. My parents exchanged a glance that contained volumes. She's between opportunities at the moment, my mother said carefully. What does that mean? My father sighed. She had some difficulties at her last position. Creative differences with management, she said. She's taking some time to figure out her next steps. Translation. Sophia had been fired. I wasn't surprised. The same manipulation tactics that had worked so well in our family dynamic would not be tolerated in a professional environment. I see, I said neutrally. And how are you both doing still in the same house? Another loaded glance between them. We've downsized, actually, my father admitted. The market has been challenging for my practice lately, and with Sophia's situation. He trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. They had been supporting Sophia financially probably for some time. The golden child was no longer shining so brightly, and it was costing them. As the conversation continued, I pieced together more of the story from their careful phrasings and telling omissions. From what I could gather, Sophia had lost her job due to conflicts with colleagues and an inability to handle criticism. She had been unable to find comparable employment and was currently living with our parents while exploring her options. The family home had been remortgaged to cover mounting debts most likely related to supporting Sophia and her lifestyle. I felt a complex mix of emotions as I absorbed this information. There was a certain vindication in knowing that Sophia's manipulative behavior had finally caught up with her. But there was also a surprising sadness for the sister I had once loved before the competition, and jealousy had poisoned our relationship. After an hour of stilted conversation, I made my excuses and prepared to leave. As I stood up, my mother reached for my hand. It was wonderful to see you, Ivy, she said with what seemed like genuine warmth. We're so proud of what you've accomplished. The words I had longed to hear for most of my childhood now rang hollow. Their pride hadn't been there when I needed it, when it might have made a difference in my sense of self-worth. Now it felt like they were trying to claim credit for a success they had played no part in creating. Thank you for the coffee, I said politely. I'll be in touch. I walked away feeling strangely empty. I had imagined this moment many times over the years, the day my parents would finally see my worth. But now that it had happened, it meant less than I had expected. My validation came from within now, not from their belated recognition. A week after our coffee meeting, I received a call from a cousin who had always been kind to me, even during the family split. Have you heard what's happening with Sophia? She asked without preamble. No, I replied. I just had coffee with my parents, but they were pretty vague about her situation. She's a mess, Ivy, my cousin said. She lost her job because she was taking credit for other people's work and bad-mouthing colleagues to management. When it all came out, she had a meltdown and was escorted from the building. No one in the industry will touch her now. I listened as my cousin detailed Sophia's downward spiral, the job loss, the mounting credit card debt, the increasing dependence on our parents for financial support. The family home where I had grown up had been remortgaged to cover these expenses, and my father had been forced to postpone his retirement. Your parents have depleted their savings, my cousin concluded. They're in real trouble, Ivy. And Sophia, she's not handling it well. I thanked my cousin for the information and sat for a long time afterward processing what I had learned. There was a part of me, a small hurt part that I wasn't particularly proud of, that felt a grim satisfaction. Karma had indeed come back around. The golden child had fallen, and the parents who had enabled her at my expense were now facing the consequences of their choices. But the dominant feeling was sadness, for the wasted potential, for the broken relationships, for the pain that seemed to have spread through our family like a contagion. No one had won in this scenario. Sophia's manipulation had ultimately hurt her as much as it had hurt me, trapping her in patterns that couldn't succeed in the real world. My parents had invested everything in the wrong child, not because Sophia was inherently more valuable, but because they had created a dynamic that prevented either of us from developing in a healthy way. The next day, as I was leaving a meeting with our development team, my assistant informed me that someone was waiting to see me. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says she's your sister. I froze. Sophia, here in my office, after 8 years of minimal contact, most of it hostile or strained. Send her in, I said, after a moment's consideration. Sophia entered hesitantly, looking both familiar and strange. She was still beautiful, but there was a hardness to her features that hadn't been there before, a tightness around her eyes that spoke of stress and discontent. She was expensively dressed, but the designer outfit couldn't hide the fact that she had lost weight, her face gaunt in a way that suggested it was due to stress rather than diet. "Ivy," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "Thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What can I do for you, Sophia?" She sat down clutching her handbag, as if it might shield her from this conversation. "I saw your feature in Business Weekly," she began. "Your company sounds incredible." "Thank you," I said neutrally. "I always knew you were smart." She continued, a forced lightness in her tone. "Even when we were kids, you were always reading, always figuring things out." I waited, knowing there was more to this visit than reminiscing about childhood. "I'm in a bit of a difficult situation right now," Sophia finally admitted, her voice dropping. "Professionally, I mean, and financially." "I heard," I replied. Her eyes widened slightly. "From Mom and Dad?" "No, they were quite vague about your circumstances." Sophia's face hardened. "Of course they were. They're so ashamed of me now. Their perfect daughter, their golden child, unemployed and living in their guest room at 23. There was a bitterness in her voice that I recognized all too well, the resentment of never quite measuring up to expectations. It was a feeling I knew intimately, though I never would have expected Sophia to experience it. "What do you want from me, Sophia?" I asked directly. She looked down, fiddling with the clasp of her bag. "I need a job or a loan, something to get me back on my feet." I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister, the girl who had made my childhood miserable, who had lied about me, who had contributed directly to my being kicked out of the house. And now she was here asking for my help. "Why should I help you?" I asked, not unkindly but honestly. "After everything you did." To my surprise, Sophia's composure cracked completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. "I know," she whispered. "I know what I did. I was terrible to you. I lied, I manipulated, I did everything I could to make Mom and Dad love me more than you." Her honesty was unexpected and disarming. I handed her a tissue from the box on my desk. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" Sophia took a shuddering breath. "Because I was terrified of being overshadowed. You were so naturally good at things. You didn't even have to try. You were smarter, more creative, more authentic. People were drawn to you. Grandma Rose adored you. And I was just the pretty one, the one who had to perform constantly to get any attention at all." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's not how it was, Sophia. You were the star. Mom and Dad doted on you. They celebrated your smallest achievements while ignoring my biggest ones." She shook her head. "They put pressure on me, constant, relentless pressure to be perfect, to be the daughter they could brag about." Every time you did well at something, I panicked. What if they realized you were better than me? What if they stopped thinking I was special, so I sabotaged you? I made sure they saw you as the problem, so they would keep seeing me as the solution. It was a perspective I had never considered. While I had been envying Sophia's golden child status, she had been terrified of losing it. We had both been victims of our parents' dysfunctional approach to raising children, albeit in very different ways. "What happened with your job?" I asked, changing the subject slightly. Sophia wiped her eyes. I tried to use the same tactics that had always worked at home. Taking credit for others' ideas, undermining colleagues I saw as threats, manipulating situations to make myself look good. But the real world doesn't work like that. People caught on. They called me out. And when I couldn't handle the criticism, I fell apart. Her honesty was both painful and refreshing. For the first time, Sophia was taking responsibility for her actions rather than deflecting blame. "Mom and Dad have been supporting me," she continued, "but they're running out of money. Dad had to take out a second mortgage on the house. Mom had to sell her jewelry, the real stuff, not just costume pieces. They're in financial trouble and it's my fault. Just like what happened with you was my fault." I sat with this information, turning it over in my mind. My parents, who had always seemed so solid, so secure in their middle-class prosperity, were struggling. My sister, who had been groomed to be the successful one, the perfect one, had crashed and burned when faced with the real world. And now they were all facing the consequences of the toxic family dynamic they had created and perpetuated. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Sophia said quietly. "I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I'm asking for help, not just for me, but for Mom and Dad too. They're too proud to ask, but they need it." I didn't give Sophia an answer that day. I told her I needed time to think, to process everything she had shared, to decide what, if anything, I was willing to do. She left my office looking defeated, but nodded in understanding. This was more than she deserved considering our history, but less than she had hoped for. That evening, I discussed the situation with David. We had built a life together based on honesty and mutual respect, so different from the manipulative dynamics of my family of origin. His perspective was valuable to me, a counterbalance to the emotional turbulence I was feeling. "What do you think I should do?" I asked as we sat on our balcony watching the Chicago skyline light up against the darkening sky. "I can't tell you that," David replied. "This is your family, your history. But I can ask you this. What outcome would bring you peace?" It was a profound question, one that forced me to look beyond the immediate satisfaction of either helping or refusing to help. What resolution to this situation would allow me to move forward without regret or lingering bitterness? I also consulted with my therapist, Dr. Chen, who had helped me work through much of my family trauma over the years. "There's no right answer here, Ivy," she told me. "Whatever you decide, it needs to be a choice that respects your boundaries and honors your journey." After several days of reflection, I made my decision. I arranged a meeting with my parents at their home, insisting that Sophia be present as well. I wanted to address the situation with all of them together, to bring the dysfunctional patterns into the light where they could no longer fester. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the once pristine lawn slightly overgrown, the paint on the shutters beginning to peel. These were small signs, but they confirmed what I had been told about my parents' financial struggles. My father answered the door, his surprise evident when he saw me standing on the porch. "Ivy, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said, "but we need to talk. All of us." He led me into the living room where my mother and Sophia were sitting. My mother rose to her feet when she saw me, an uncertain smile on her face. "This is a surprise," she echoed my father. "Sophia came to see me," I said, getting straight to the point. "She told me about your situation." My father's face hardened. "We don't need charity, Ivy." "This isn't about charity," I replied. "This is about family, about acknowledging the past before we can move forward." I sat down in the armchair across from them, the same chair where I had often been lectured or criticized as a teenager. But now I was sitting there as an adult, as a successful businesswoman who had built something meaningful without their support. 8 years ago, you chose to believe Sophia's lies over the truth. I began. You kicked me out of this house with nowhere to go, based on an accusation that was proven false within hours. You never apologized. You never even acknowledged what you did. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father looked away. Sophia stared at her hands in her lap. For years, you treated me as less than Sophia. You dismissed my achievements, magnified my mistakes, and made me feel like I would never be good enough. And when Sophia accused me of stealing, you didn't even consider the possibility that she might be lying. You were ready to throw away your relationship with your daughter rather than question the golden child. My voice remained calm, but I could feel the emotion bubbling beneath the surface. These were words I had wanted to say for years, truths that had gone unspoken for too long. I built my life without you. I put myself through college. I created a successful company. I found people who love and value me for who I am. I didn't come here today to rub my success in your faces or to gloat about your problems. I came because if we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward, it has to be based on truth. My father finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of defensiveness and shame. What do you want us to say, Ivy? That we made a mistake. Fine, we made a mistake. It wasn't just a mistake, I replied. It was a pattern. A lifetime of choosing Sophia over me, of creating a dynamic that hurt both of us in different ways. Yes, I want you to acknowledge that. But more importantly, I want to know if you're willing to change. Really change. A heavy silence fell over the room. My mother was openly crying now. Sophia looked miserable, but resigned, as if she had been expecting this confrontation. My father, always the most stubborn, seemed to be struggling internally. I failed you, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. As a father, I failed you completely. I was so focused on maintaining the image of a perfect family that I couldn't see the damage I was doing to my own child. It was more than I had expected from him, this admission of failure. My mother reached for my hand across the coffee table. We were wrong, Ivy, she said through her tears. So terribly wrong. I can't undo the hurt we caused you, but I would give anything to try to make it right. Their words were healing in a way, but they also highlighted how much time and love had been lost. 8 years of my life where I had been essentially parentless. Special moments and achievements that should have been shared with family, but were instead celebrated with friends who had become my chosen family. I'm willing to help, I said after a long pause, but I have conditions. My father straightened, his pride reasserting itself. What conditions? First, you both need to go to therapy, not just for what happened with me, but to address the patterns that led to it. The favoritism, the unrealistic expectations, all of it. My mother nodded immediately. My father hesitated, but eventually gave a curt nod as well. Second, I'm not just giving you money. That wouldn't solve the underlying issues. Instead, I'm offering to help you restructure your finances, maybe refinance the house at a better rate through some contacts I have. And Sophia? My father asked. I turned to my sister. I'm offering you a job, but it's entry level. You'll start at the bottom like everyone else. No special treatment. You'll be expected to work hard and prove yourself just like any other employee. And you'll also need to continue therapy to work on your own issues. Sophia looked as if she wanted to protest, but then seemed to think better of it. That's fair, she said reluctantly. More than fair considering our history, I replied. There was more discussion after that, practical details about the financial help I would provide, boundaries for our renewed relationship expectations moving forward. But the most important part had already happened. For the first time, my parents had acknowledged their role in the family dysfunction. It wasn't a magical fix, and it didn't erase the years of pain, but it was a start. In the year that followed, there were many difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. My parents struggled with therapy at first, particularly my father, who had never been one to examine his emotions or motivations. But gradually they began to understand the harm their parenting approach had caused, and to take responsibility for it. Sophia, to my surprise, thrived in the entry-level position at Refuge. When stripped of the expectation to be automatically brilliant when forced to actually earn recognition, rather than having it handed to her, she discovered an authentic work ethic and genuine talents she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't a natural at the job initially, but she was willing to learn to take feedback to grow. And over time, she became a valuable team member. Our relationship as sisters would never be simple or uncomplicated. There was too much history, too much hurt on both sides. But we were finding a new way to interact, one based on mutual respect rather than competition or resentment. My parents and I established a cautious new relationship as well. I maintained firm boundaries. I wouldn't be manipulated or taken for granted again, but I allowed for the possibility of healing and growth. We had occasional family dinners, awkward at first, but gradually becoming more natural. They asked about my work with genuine interest, and I shared the parts of my life I felt comfortable sharing. On the first anniversary of our confrontation, I hosted a dinner at my apartment. It was the first time my parents and Sophia had visited my home, met David, and seen the life I had built without them. There was a moment as we sat around the table when I caught my father looking around with a mixture of pride and regret in his eyes. "You've done well, Ivy," he said quietly. "Not because of us, but despite us." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever said to me, and I appreciated it more than any empty praise or belated recognition of my success. He was acknowledging not just what I had accomplished, but the obstacles I had overcome to get there. As I reflect on my journey from the rejected child to the successful adult I am today, I'm struck by how the pain of my past has shaped but not defined me. The family dynamic that once hurt me so deeply has been a driving force behind my mission to help others find refuge from their own family trauma. The rejection that once made me question my worth has given me the empathy to create a company culture where everyone feels valued. And perhaps most importantly, I've learned that true family isn't always about blood relations. It's about the people who stand by you when you have nothing to offer but yourself. It's about those who see your authentic self and love you not despite your flaws and differences, but because of the unique perspective they bring. My chosen family, David, Zoe, the Walkers, my colleagues at Refuge, has been the greatest blessing of my adult life. As for my family of origin, we continue to work on building something new from the ashes of what was lost. It's not perfect, and it never will be. But there is healing and truth in boundaries, in the willingness to acknowledge mistakes and commit to change. The karma that came back to haunt my parents and Sophia wasn't about vengeance or punishment. It was simply the natural consequence of the patterns they had created and perpetuated. In the end, those patterns hurt them as much as they hurt me. The real victory isn't in seeing them struggle now, but in breaking the toxic cycle for the next generation. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to protect your own worth? Have you experienced being the problem child while watching a golden child get all the love and support? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family rejection. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, share this video with them. Remember, you are worthy of love and respect, regardless of your family's ability to see your value. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength on your own journey of healing.